Welcome to Down and Distance, where the playbook of football meets the principles of godly manhood and leadership. I'm Coach Kramer, and here we talk about what it means to lead with purpose and advance with strategy on the field of life. If you've ever faced a moment where the next move wasn't clear, where the pressure was high and the clock was ticking, this is your huddle. Because although leadership is about calling plays and making critical decisions, it's also about knowing your position, trusting your team, and executing with faith. So lace up, lock in, and let's break down the game plan for living and leading with conviction and clarity. This is Down and Distance, where every yard gained is a step towards fulfilling your purpose. So last week we talked about self-assessment. We're talking about building a game plan. We talked about the value of self-assessment in the sense of understanding your identity and more specifically understanding your strengths and weaknesses. Today, we're going to get into the second phase of the way a football coach builds a game plan, which is now that we know who we are, now that we know what we're strong at, now that we know what we're maybe not as strong at, we feel like we have a foundation for the things that we're going to build this game plan on from a skill set. Now we're going to do opponent analysis. Okay, so as a football coach, opponent analysis is all about things like identifying tendencies, right? So what do they do in specific situations of the field, or what do they do in specific down and distance situations, or what circumstances create opportunities because they do specific things, whether it's a coverage on the back end or whether it's blitzes that they like to run, whatever it is, personnel groupings, whatever it is, you're identifying those tendencies that the other team has. The other thing that you're doing is you're finding your mismatches, right? So you're finding those one-on-ones where when you know you have to make a play, what guy do you have that can beat their guy, basically? Where can you create positive mismatches for you? And so we call that finding your edges, right? So in that sense, as a football coach, it's more about finding where you have an edge. When opportunities present themselves, where am I going to have an advantage? For us, as godly men, and for us pursuing a life of purpose and pursuing the advancement strategically, then for us it's kind of more about us. It's about identifying our edges, right? Where in 1 Peter it says the devil prowls around like a roaring lion, right? So it's about making sure we don't have exposed edges because we live in a world and we live in a culture and we live in a society where we're constantly being attacked, right? We're constantly being presented with opportunities to slip up or to fail or to maybe not fulfill the things that God's called us to fulfill in that moment. And so it's extremely important that for us as men, we understand where our edges are. Okay, where are we vulnerable? Is it in the areas of lust, frustration, anger? Is it when you're tired? Is it when you're excited? We often look at the negative, but the reality is we make as many mistakes or we relax as often in those moments of success where we're in this celebratory state. And we let our guard down too. So those are our moments when we make mistakes, or maybe we don't completely live up to what we know we're supposed to be living up to. So it's about identifying where we're vulnerable for our edges. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to expose what those are for us. Okay, so we have to understand that for me. When I am faced with a certain battle, and for us, we're fighting two opponents on all the time, right? We're fighting the devil himself and temptations and the ways, like he says in 1 Peter, he prowls around like a roaring lion. He's literally, if you visualize that, he's literally just waiting and watching for that moment when he can pounce, right? So is it pride? I say this all the time. I personally think one of the most misquoted scriptures in the Bible is pride comes before the fall. That is not what it says. It says that a haughty spirit comes before the fall. Pride comes before destruction. And so where are those moments that I am so prideful that I just refuse to adapt or adjust or conform or take advice, take direction, take coaching, right? And we all have those. And so we have to expose what those are. You have to be vulnerable and understand that these are the areas that I struggle with. It's not about accepting that it's a negative. It's not about accepting that it's a struggle. It's about knowing that it's a struggle so that you can then do something about it, right? And so you have to be honest with yourself, just like we talked about last week. You have to be honest with yourself when you're doing a self-identity or self-assessment. And you have to understand these are my strengths and these are my weaknesses. It's not about accepting, okay, well, this is my weakness, I'm not going to do anything about it. No, you're absolutely going to work on making your weaknesses not as big of weaknesses, right? But if you focus so much on that, then you're also not adding value to your strengths. So it's a process. This is too. Exposing those areas in our life where we do struggle is just as important, if not more important, because being honest with yourself and knowing that this is my area, this is the edge that if to stay in line with down and distance, if we're playing a football team, this is where the opponent is going to attack us because we understand this is a mismatch, right? We understand that this is a tendency for us, but it's a tendency because it's something we feel like we have to do to give ourselves a chance to compete. Well, in life, it's the same way. This is a weakness of mine. I'm working on it. I'm trying to make it better. But the reality is, it's one of those areas that is exposed for me. It's an area that I'm vulnerable. And so then what I have to do is I have to detect that, right? And by detect, I don't mean detect it like see it. I mean detect as if like a detective. So you have to investigate, right? What lies or patterns are present in that moment that make that a vulnerable edge? In other words, if it's in a circumstance, what lie or pattern was in that circumstance? Did I believe going into that allowed that to be an edge? Was it a lack of self-confidence? Was it a lack of self-belief in what I was doing? So do I need to spend more time becoming more knowledgeable in that or becoming stronger in that area so that I do have more confidence? Is it fatigue? Do I need to make sure before I get in these circumstances that I know are coming up that I am rested as best I can be? Sometimes that's not always possible. I get that, but it's still about understanding that and detecting, investigating why those things are your edges. So we've exposed their edges. These are the areas that I'm weak in. Why are those areas that I'm weak in, and what can I do to make those to stronger, to build those up? And that's called guarding, right? So what truth or habit can I create? What truth can I learn or habit can I create that I can guard against that edge? So if I know it's a weakness and I know why it's a weakness, what's my response to that? That's what it's about, right? It's about being intentional. It's advancing strategically is what we say. This is where we're talking about that. It's not enough to know it's a problem. It's not enough to know why it's a problem. You have to come up with a sound plan of what you're going to do about that problem. What are you going to do about that exposed edge? How am I going to make sure that that doesn't become an issue for me and continue lead to me slipping up or struggling or failing or feeling like, and I don't know how you guys are, but I am. Every time I make the same mistake over and over and over and over, it seems like it compounds, like it just beats me down. It gets harder and harder and harder, and I feel less and less adequate and less like the leader that I'm supposed to be. So then doubt creeps in. Well, that brings other stuff, right? So if we're not on top of it, it piles up. And it becomes so heavy, right? So guarding it, that's where the truth comes in. Where it says what truth? Well, that's God's word. So find those scriptures that directly address those and memorize them. Learn them, study them. What do they mean? How do they apply to you? That's matter. That's our playbook. God gave us every answer we ever need. We just have to take the time to read it. It all applies to us, but specifically in those moments, what verses directly correlate to that, to give me strength, to give me confidence, to give me courage to keep doing what I'm trying to be doing. And then lastly, we just execute, right? We literally, how am I going to respond in the moment? So I know what the problem is. I know what the concern is. I know what my edge is. I've investigated, I've detected it, right? I've looked into why it's a problem. I've come up with steps to guard against that problem. Now I just have to do it. Now it's just responding in that moment. And that's what it's all about for us. So as you're building the game plan, you've done your self-assessment, you know who you are, you know your strengths, you know your weaknesses. Okay, now we've gone into understanding, doing an opponent analysis and understanding where our weaknesses are, where we're exposed in those moments. And that's about those specific plays, right? I want to make sure I point that out. When we're talking about opponent analysis, sure, we're looking at, as a football coach, I'm looking, okay, they're a odd front, or they're, man zero, or whatever their basic coverage is. Like, they have their basic stuff. I'm not talking about the basic stuff. I'm talking about the specific tendencies, the specific mismatches, those plays that typically lean to giving you a chance at being successful or creating an experience where you're not going to be successful. So we're talking about specific identifiable moments, times, struggles, etc. So hopefully that was helpful for you. Thank you for joining us on Down and Distance. If today's conversation challenged you or encouraged you, share it with a teammate. If you'd like to bring Down and Distance to your next event or retreat, we'd love to team up with you and help you build men that lead with purpose and advance with strategy. Please visit www.downanddistance.org to learn more and connect with our team. Until next time, remember that men are at their best when they live decisively, purposefully, and rooted in God's design. This is Down and Distance.